Hey YouTube, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to take a look at the AllThingzUTV tender spring kit for the Honda Talon 1000R. This is intended to improve ride quality for trail riding applications. That's primarily what I do here in the Midwest. I ride a lot in Tennessee, Indiana, Kentucky, and around the surrounding area. And what this kit comes with is are two front tender springs and two rear tender springs. I went with red to match the Talon that I've got, or the springs on the Talon that I've got. And installation should be pretty simple, relatively speaking. What we're going to do first is get the fronts out of the way. I've got it just up off the ground enough where the wheels and tires will come off. I am going to remove the wheels and tires. Then we're going to pull those shocks off and work on those one at a time. So these are the front tender springs and these are the rear tender springs, and they do send you some instructions. I'll go into some more specific details as we get to them individually on preload adjustments and then as well as crossover ring adjustments. So bear with me and we'll get right into it. Now, after you remove the wheel and tire from the front, what we're going to be working with are the lower shock bolt and nut, as well as the upper shock bolt and nut, which is up here. It's much easier to get to with the hood off, so go ahead and take that off. You'll just remove each of those. I'm going to start with the lower, then the upper, and I'm going to pull the whole shock off. So the hardware for the lower shock mount is 17 millimeter. It's also going to be the same for the upper. Now when you get the nut off of the bolt, you can just kind of lift up a little bit on your control arm and it'll make it where you can pull this right out. Then we should be able to come right up here to the upper bolt, push it out front, and remove the entire shock absorber. Now my shocks are set at factory preload still, which really isn't a whole lot. It looks like it is 1.25 inches from the bottom of the shock mount up here to the top of the locking ring. I do want to get a little bit more preload even after I put these tender springs on, I think. So seeing as we're in 1.25 inches now, I'm probably going to set mine at 2 inches and see where that puts me. So anytime you're working with shocks like this, you want to make sure that your threads are as clean and as well lubricated as possible. I'm just using regular WD-40. And the reason you want to do that is these shock bodies are made of aluminum. So if you get something caught in between the ring and the body, you can actually damage your threads on the shock body. So just lubricate them and clean them as well as possible. Then here in a second, we'll work on breaking this thing loose and getting the factory tender off of it. So to get this thing broken off, I'm just using a rubber mallet and then a flathead screwdriver. I'm going to get it just lodged in there like so. Now we can see that ring is turning. Should be able to run it up the rest of the way by hand. See, it's spinning pretty well. If you feel some friction or like there's dirt in there, just stop, spray some more lube on it, and clean those up with like a wire brush or some kind of towel. So now what we want to do, we're going to have some tension on the spring because we still have this adjustment collar right here. What we want to do is we want to loosen this as well and run it up to get the tension off the spring. And then what that'll do is it'll allow us to, let me flip it around, get the retaining collar down here in the bottom pulled out of it, and then we're going to pull the springs off of the bottom. Okay, so what I'm going to do is get it set up where the reservoir is on this side because I need the ring to spin this direction right here, and it's going to put a little leverage against it. If I don't have my vise set up right now, I should probably just go ahead and do that, but you can do it this way. It's a little bit longer. Tap the ring like that. And we're going to just repeat this process until the ring is all the way up and we've got tension off of the spring. So now what we can do that we get to this point and got the tension off, you can generally pick these up and hold it, just use some gloves for grip, and you can twist the spring and the ring will work its way up the shock body just a little quicker than using a screwdriver and hammer. And you go to remove the retaining collar. So you may have seen some shocks before where they have like a slot in them and you can just pull down and slide the whole thing off. This one actually has a C-clip in it, so that's what this metal clip is here, and then you can see the opening. What you'll want to do is just apply downward pressure to the shock where you can get it unseated from that, then take yourself a screwdriver and just pop that C-clip right off. Okay, so here's the C-clip, and I was not able to get that on camera the way I had to hold it and angle it. I just needed another person to hold the camera. But what I did is I got a pair of external snap ring pliers and put them in the groove just enough to separate it. And you can see I pushed the collar down and it's off center, so that's where it would normally be. And I left it kind of in that position, and then as the C-clip loosened up with the snap ring pliers, I just used a small screwdriver to wedge in between it, and then took a larger screwdriver and basically used it like a tire spoon just to get the C-clip out of the groove. Okay, so now that the C-clip is loosened up, we're just going to pop it off right there. And then the whole collar comes off the bottom. There are no grooves, so you don't actually slide it off, and we can pop this thing off. So we're going to keep the mainspring. I'm going to set it oriented to the way it went on, so the bottom is going to be the bottom. And your ring there. The factory tender here. So this is going to be replaced by the AllThingzUTV one. And just looking at it, this is the factory one. It's quite a bit thicker. I don't know what the exact spring rate is on this one. But I'm going to assume it's lighter, just judging by the thickness of the spring. As Side-by-Side blog likes to say, we can do a springality test on it. And this one does feel lighter. The AllThingzUTV one does feel lighter. Powder coat matches pretty good. Doesn't appear to be 100% exact, maybe just because this is dirty. The next thing I want to talk about are the measurements for the crossover ring. Mine right now, from the top of the locking crossover ring, so the top one, to the bottom of the black part up here is about 3.5 inches. And thinking about it, what I want to happen is I want to use more of the tender spring travel as opposed to the mainspring travel for my riding style, because I want more of that slow, lighter chop to get soaked up. So basically what happens, kind of in short, I'm not going to get super detailed on this, is this part of the shock the shock spring ring is going to come up and it bumps into this. So what happens then is when it hits this, the tender spring up here compresses, this makes contact with it, and then your shock absorption moves to your mainspring, which is whatever the spring rate is on this, for additional higher load, I guess, absorption, for a lack of a better term. What I want to happen is I want to use as much of the tender as possible, and again, this is my preference, may not be for everybody, but I want a plusher ride, essentially. So if we wanted to use more of the mainspring, we would move this lower, that way this piece right here would contact here, then transfer the load to the mainspring. What I'm going to do is move the crossover ring up just a little bit, and I'm going to probably end up having to play with this a few times, but I'm going to move it up so that this has more room to travel, thus letting the tender spring compress some more before moving over to the mainspring. So now this is the AllThingzUTV tender spring. Again, there's a comparison. Then I'm going to clean this up while it's off. Then the last thing we'll do is we will get our mainspring back on. And assembly is basically going to go in reverse. Again, I doubt I'll be able to catch this on camera just because I need a cameraman to hold everything as I move this around. But what I'm going to do is put kind of a downward pressure on there. We'll get the collar on, get the C-clip in, then adjust our preload. All right, quick note on that preload. I guess reading instructions is beneficial, but they actually do call to use 2 inches. So if you read the top, this is the front tender spring. We are right here now. So where we're going to adjust our spanner nut setting, which are these nuts here that adjust your preload. We're going to adjust that to 2 inches. We started at 1.25 inches, if you remember. We're going to go to 2 and try that out. But the difference is I've adjusted the crossover ring to get a little more travel out of that. And if you read down here, that gives you some additional start right there. Good starting point in preferred trail setting while the machine's at rest is 2 inches from the black slider collar. So I don't know exactly where that's going to be, but what he's referring to is this collar. So I'm going to set it this way. Definitely get yourself a pair of gloves. These are rubber coated, so it's probably making things a little easier for me. And that circlip on the bottom, I was able to put it in my hand. It really doesn't have that much tension on it when you're putting it on, so it was no problem to get on there. Putting it on, so it was no problem to get on there. Now let's talk crossover ring setting. So this is something you can do with springs on as far as adjustment goes. Mine are I'm at 1.5 inches right now. Right at 2.5 inches from the bottom of the crossover ring to the sliding collar. They're recommending 2. So I'm probably going to stay here at 2.5 and see how I like that. I do want to try and use as much of that as possible just to see how that does with the chop. So I'm going to see how that does first. I'm going to lock this down and then do the driver's side. I've got one rear done. What you're looking at now is the driver's side rear shock. And you'll notice the preload on this one, you're gonna have a lot more room to work with. When you are disassembling, just go ahead and break these nuts loose and run them all the way to the top of the shock. Then when it's time to release the lower retaining collar, it's basically the same as the front with a very minor difference. Let's see if I can get it where you can see it. It still has the circlip. And then this entire piece right here is keyed. So when you remove it, just make sure you line it up in the groove, and I'll show you that when I get to that point. But it's basically the same process. This spring is significantly longer than the factory one. So take that into account. That's why you want to run these all the way up, just to give yourself plenty of room to work with. And then the preload is going to be 2.5 inches, and we'll go over. So it's just a matter of repeating this until you set your preload far enough, and then locking them down, and we'll do the crossover rings as well. Okay, I've got my 2.5 inches of preload set. In this distance here, what I'm going to do now with crossover rings is do, I'll show you how I'm taking this measurement, and this is just for my settings. I'm going to do 3 1/4 from the top of the spanner nut to the top of the top crossover ring, So it's going to be right in here by the time I move it. Then it's a matter of just putting the shock back on the Talon, mounting the wheels and tires up, setting it all down. So I've got all the All Things UTV tender springs on now. Checking ride height. And it definitely does sit higher than it did before. The torque spec, just for immediately looking at it, shock mounting bolts is 58 foot-pounds. Axles that is front and rear, upper and lower. Not quite at that much of an angle, but in my opinion, that's an appropriate service manual right here. So that's good. So you can see. And I just measured ground clearance, and the front is about 15 and a half. It's just a shade over 15 and a half inches. And then the rear is right at 15 and a half. And like I said earlier, you typically want the rear to be a little bit lower. And this is probably actually a good measurement because I do carry gear in the back. So by the time I get that extra weight, it's going to sit down a little bit. And then with a little bit of heat, I'm sure I'll lose a little bit more right there as well when some heat gets to those shocks. So just in the mile or so I ran down the road, it does seem to have a little more body roll, which I would expect if it's going to have a softer spring rate. Nothing that feels dangerous or unsafe, anything like that. Like I said, I'm not going to have a ride report in this video. I will probably include that in a later video where I'm planning to do, I don't know if it'll be a 500 mile review or how I'll do that. But I am going to do another video here soon that's basically, I've owned the Talon for X amount of months. Here's what I think of it. Here's what I like. Here's what I would improve. And then I'll go over all the accessories that I've gone or that I've added to it in one spot. So if you want this kit, or if you're interested in this kit, there will be a link in the description immediately below. Please consider liking, subscribing, sharing this video. That helps me out. And as always, if you have questions, let me know. Drop them in the comments below or shoot me a message, and I would be happy to answer them. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you next time.